Good morning, Illini. Welcome back to another Healthy Illini podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schrock, as always, and it is April. We are almost to the end of the semester, but there's other things happening in April that we want to talk about. And today we actually have a little bit of a special situation. We're going to have a two-part episode. We've done this before in the past, but it's been a while. And so the first part you're listening to now has dropped on Tuesday, and the second half will drop on Thursday morning. So be sure when you're listening to this that you check out that second half because it will continue the conversation very directly in this particular episode. And so it's going to be a special one here, and I'm excited to get into it. It has a personal appeal to me, and we'll talk about that when we get there. Today I'm joined by three of our staff here at the University of Illinois, and they are all very active with our student body. First up, we have Dr. Jeannie Kramer. She is the director of the Autism program and also the director of the Illinois Neurodiversity Initiative. Dr. Kramer, thanks for being here.
Great to be here. Thanks for having us.
Also joined by two of her assistant directors with those programs. First up is Adrienne Shockley. She's the assistant director with the Autism program. Adrienne, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
And also Dr. Kim Patton. She's the assistant director for the Illinois Neurodiversity Initiative. Thanks for being here, Kim.
Thank you.
So, like I said, we're coming up on graduation. That's kind of the defining moment of the campus in April, but April is also Autism Awareness Month. And so that's really what we're talking about today. And I'm like I said, I'm looking forward to having this conversation because it is a personal one for me. I do have a son who is on the autism spectrum. And so as the host of the program, I get to learn about a lot of topics. I love learning every time. I learn something new every time I have a conversation with somebody, and in whatever way it pertains to health and wellness. But again, this one is personal for me. So I will admit, before he was born or before he was diagnosed, he was very young, I was aware of the autism spectrum. I knew it was a thing. I kind of had a very vague idea, most of it from, pop culture in some way. But then when we got the diagnosis, I realized I knew very little. There was really nothing I knew about it other than the name. And so I'm assuming that some of our listeners are in the same situation. So let's just start there. Can you just kind of define what autism is and maybe define what neurodivergence is very briefly on that, because we do want to focus on autism specifically under that umbrella. But if you could kind of just give a definition and kind of a baseline of what those terms mean.
I'll start with neurodiversity. It's a term that actually was born out of autism. It was an autistic individual who coined that term, and it means different brain. Basically, autism is a condition of the brain where brain wiring is different than the general population and falls into a specific pattern. So we can call it autism because there are certain traits and characteristics that make a person autistic. And then there are also other neurodivergent conditions that have been added on since then, like ADHD, Tourette's syndrome, dyslexia, other learning disabilities. But a lot of times, the reason that neurodiversity is an important thing to consider is because a lot of people are blamed for their differences and how their brain works as it being a personality trait or a flaw or a choice, but we each can answer the question, what's your favorite kind of ice cream, differently, and no one can understand why I like chocolate chip and my colleagues might like butter pecan or strawberry. Our brains are different, and so neurodiversity is global. It's with every human and every person.
And with that, it does cover a huge variety. I'm sorry, Adrienne, I cut you off. You were going to say it does cover a huge spectrum. Also, I mean, that's the word is spectrum, and we could spend an entire podcast, like simple podcast, just completely devoted to neurodiversity and still never cover everything. So we're not even going to try today. We know that, and within that, in autism, we can't even cover everything that's there either. But we're gonna try and get a little bit. So with under that neurodivergent umbrella, that idea of slightly of different brain kind of idea, what makes autism autism? What defines it?
Yeah, so two traits that all people on the spectrum share are social communication deficits. So the autistic brain has difficulty doing and understanding socially expected behavior, and social nuances will likely need to be taught. And then the other diagnostic criteria is restrictive repetitive behaviors or interests. The autistic brain needs that sameness and familiarity. And so some examples of that could be like lining up toys, flapping hands, spinning, jumping, rocking, humming. These are often behaviors that help kind of keep them regulated. And as they get older, maybe wanting to talk mostly about their area of high interest. My brother is also on the spectrum, and his area of high interest was always Pokemon, for example. And so we'd always be having conversations. It could be about anything, and somehow he'd always redirect the conversation back to Pokemon. And so we had to, later start talking to him about how that's not always, somebody's interest, and you have to have kind of this more back and forth of sharing of interests in conversations. So those kind of social nuances that need to be kind of taught. And then kind of a lesser discussed trait are sensory challenges. And this is often a big factor for dysregulation. Maybe the room is too loud, or there's too many people, the clothes that they're wearing are itchy, or the shoes are too tight. Maybe a smell of food or the texture of the food is making them gag or something like that. That can often lead to dysregulation.
Before we move on, if I could, because this is a term that's going to be used a lot when we're talking about anything neurodivergent, anything autistic, is dysregulation and self-regulation. Mm-hmm. But if you're not involved in it, you might not know what that means. So could you share a little bit about what dysregulation means and kind of how it affects somebody?
Yeah, indeed. I'll take that one. There's a great book out there. It's called Uniquely Human, A Different Way of Looking at Autism. It's by Dr. Barry Prezant, and he explains autism as being a disorder of dysregulation or of regulation. Being regulated is being at your normal healthy baseline. It's when you can attend and focus in a normal, consistent manner, and being dysregulated is anything that deviates from that. So you may find that your senses are dysregulated. I think all of us can relate to that feeling of having a tag in our shirt that is bothering us all day, and we finally take that shirt off and it feels so good, or lumps in your socks.
I could feel it just as you talked about it.
Sure.
That initially, I was like,
sure. Right. And before we started this podcast, Matt, you said you were bracing yourself for the loud beep before you turned on the microphone.
Yes.
So those are sensory things. We also talk about emotional dysregulation. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes the sensory can contribute to the emotional dysregulation. So you can have the sensory system overloaded by a background noise or a type of lighting, and then all of a sudden you're feeling very, very angry, or very, very aggressive, or very, very anxious or giggly. Mm-hmm. So there's dysregulation is that state that you're in when you're not at your normal healthy baseline.
And it can be, and the hard part of all of this, and talking about the repetitive interest, the sensory challenges, is that it's very unique to each person. You can't say, oh, this person has a high interest in Pokemon, so that means they must be on the autism spectrum.
Right.
Or it can even be like, for me, there are certain noises that I feel dysregulated, right? But for some of those noises, those are the ones that help my son find his center, because for whatever reason, it's calming to him. And so there's that disconnect for us that I know that when he hears, I'm like, okay, he's struggling. I'm struggling now. It's okay. Different ways. We're going to make this work. And so it can be very hard because it's such a huge spectrum of how it affects an individual. And I want to talk a little bit as we get into going forward some indicators. But the other thing that's really interesting in this is, Adrian, you talked about how sensory challenges are kind of the new idea to indicators and things like that. This is all in the scope of time. This understanding and these indicators and these programs and processes to help are all very new. They're all very young, and that's only been the last few years that there's been a lot of conversation and a lot of study, things like that 15, 20 years ago, were not part of any kind of conversation. Like you said, Jeannie, was that, it was just, oh, they have a behavior issue, or they're just, a bad kid, quote unquote, or whatever, and those weren't the cases. It was a physiological thing that you couldn't do anything about, but we didn't understand that at the time, and nobody was looking for it, and nobody was studying that. And so as those developments have come, we found there's a growing prevalence in diagnoses, because we understand the indicators now a little better. We understand what's going on. So with that, jumping into the next stage, again, we could spend the entire time talking about the physiological of what autism is, and have a 3-hour podcast and still never get through it all. But as we're talking about the growing prevalence, and we're talking about the behaviors and the indicators in that, just kind of, again, understanding that it's not the same for everybody, and it's not this is a checklist we're going down, but what are some of those early indicators that could say someone could be on the spectrum?
Yeah. So some common early indicators that we see in children are the delay in or lack of joint attention. So being able to share in a certain topic or area of interest with another person, pointing to things, saying, look, do you see this? Looking back for that kind of reciprocity with communication. And then poor eye contact or not looking at faces. Sometimes this can be confused because, maybe the child will look at you, but it's not really that engagement type of look. Not responding to their name. A delayed onset of language is always, usually the first indicator that people start talking to their pediatricians about. So they're not talking, or they're not understanding, what their parents are saying to them. And then later, when language develops, maybe it's more of a rote phrases, parroting, or echolalia is often. So they're just kind of repeating back, but it's not necessarily functional. And then fascination with specific topics or things, lining up objects. High interest in moving parts of objects, often, gravitation to trains and cars and all things that move. Repetitive motor movements. So again, we talked about the jumping, the spinning, the flapping, humming, and then the decreased regulation and sensory sensitivities.
So that's quite the list.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a huge list. And, as we're going down it, I'm mentally checking off for my son, like, yeah, nope, not that one. Yep, that one. And there are some that when I talk to somebody about him, I'm like, these are the things that he exhibits. These are the things that he shows, and some of them are on that list. And so, those were some of the indicators that I remember really distinctly. Those early days when we were trying to figure out, is there something here, and seeing some of those things. And it can be tough. But it's important to be aware of what's there, and what those indicators are. And, again, there's nuance to all of it. Like I said before, enjoying Pokemon doesn't mean you're on the spectrum, right. Or not responding to your name all the time doesn't mean, or poor eye contact, because there's shy people who are not on the spectrum. They just don't like eye contact, things like that. And so just understanding that there are some indicators that can point you in the direction of, hey, this might be a diagnosis I need to follow up on. We've talked a little bit about the early indicators, which are really important. And maybe somebody listening to be like, looking back, that may be an aspect of what my experience was. And at the time, it wasn't something I noticed, or anybody noticed, or even thought about. So now we have college students coming in. But the early indicator is not the only time that people get that aspect or start wondering about it. And especially as we're working here on a college campus, and I know that you work with a lot of college students who are learning about themselves in a lot of ways. And one of those ways is this idea that I might be on the spectrum. So what is that experience like, or what advice do you have for somebody who's kind of having those questions?
Yeah, exactly. You get to college, you start forming that identity, questioning who you are. Oftentimes, people who are not diagnosed and on the autism spectrum are the people who make it to a place like University of Illinois. They've had a lot of good strategies to compensate, but have always known that they're different in some way. There's this thing that's called masking, and it's basically going through a rehearsed behavior to try to fit in so that people don't know that you're different. So if you're a person who's out there and you're thinking, I've always been different, being social is exhausting for me because I don't understand why people do the things that they do. I have to put on this social mask in order to fit in. I feel awkward and odd. It's hard to make friends. I need to go into a room and be by myself just so that I can re-regulate by doing some of those things like shaking my hands or jumping up and down. I do get very overwhelmed by sensory overload. I do have difficulty regulating my emotions. Those are some of the things that you might be more thinking about as a young adult as you're trying to explore this identity within yourself. And I want to validate all of those feelings. If those are things that you've been feeling, that's definitely a time to reach out and get more information about neurodiversity and autism in a more specific way.
But that also leads to the kind of the flip side of that coin, in that with increased awareness of anything, there's an opportunity for an increase of misconception. And the best way to combat any sort of misconception is with education. It don't matter what the topic is, just education, being educated about something, learning about something is the best way to combat any kind of untruth. And so as we're going into it, one of the things you talked about in the prep work was that there are myths and misconceptions about that. So if you would just talk a little bit about what are some of those myths, what are some of those misconceptions out there about autism in general and the people who have them or have that diagnosis. What are some of those misconceptions that are there?
Yeah, I think one of the first things that comes to mind is when you say autism or autistic person, a misconception is that they're either going to have a significant cognitive impairment and have high needs, or that they're going to be a savant Rain Man type of person that has, these great skills. And really, the general population, it falls somewhere in between. There's, of course, going to be outliers, just like in the general population. There's going to be those that have higher support needs with more cognitive impairments, and then there's going to be people that have brilliant minds. And again, that's all over in the general population. So
well, and because there is that wide range, you have people that have minds that function really well, but they just maybe can't express themselves. There are those that just have body movements they can't fully control, things like that. And so, it's just, it's that whole wide range of spectrum. The downside of that idea is that most of us can look at that list of early indicators and find at least one thing that we can say, yeah, that was something I did. But it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone is autistic. There's kind of this idea going through, and a lot of it in social media especially, that everyone is a little autistic. That's not true, correct? I mean,
right.
Okay. So would you talk about that just a little bit?
Sure. So people can share like overlapping characteristics of someone who's autistic, but you're only autistic if you follow the diagnostic criteria. So not just some of the overlapping characteristics.
Yeah, and if I could kind of piggyback on that. Yeah. Part of the autism diagnosis, it's leveled into 3 different levels. There's level 3, which is very significant support needs. Level 2 is significant support needs. And level 1 is needs support. So I really do think that the primary indicator that someone is autistic is that they have a need for support. The support may be a 24-hour caregiver. It might be accommodations in school or in the work environment. It might be having the person that you're dealing with just knowing that you're autistic. So it can range from very high support needs to very low support needs. If all of the traits that we've been talking about are traits that are part of being a human. Yeah. We all shake our hands when we're watching a sporting event. We all jump up and down and get excited. We all have moments when we feel dysregulated because we have, that piece of hair that's stuck in our ponytail and it's pulling on our head. All of those things happen to everyone in the general population. And so to say everyone's a little autistic, I think that makes us all cringe. We are not all a little autistic. When it gets to the point where you need support, that is when autism becomes autism, in my book. I don't know if either of you have anything that you'd say that's different from that.
I totally agree.
And that brings it to it is important to have an official diagnosis versus self-diagnosing for that support reason. And we're going to talk into some of those things in the next episode also, when we start talking about support and resources more in depth. But there is that talking to somebody and being diagnosed opens certain doors, gets you the support you need. And like you said, everyone has a little autistic is a little bit of a self-diagnosis kind of idea. And there's importance in making sure that there's opportunity for support and understanding what terms mean and things like that. Yeah. And so there's definite value in getting that official diagnosis versus just an introspective, this is what I think I have.
If I could interject
a
little bit there. We do have several students that are on campus here that are participating in the supports we provide who identify as being autistic without a formal diagnosis. We completely accept and validate those students who have self-identified. Generally speaking, those are students who feel very comfortable around other people who are on the autism spectrum or who are neurodivergent. So there's also value in doing research and figuring out who you are as a person. So I don't want to disqualify that.
Sure. Yeah.
I think the distinction that you're making is that to receive formal supports, you do need an official diagnosis. I want to tread on that lightly because I don't want to invalidate people who, especially females, are underdiagnosed because it doesn't look the same in females as males oftentimes. And so a lot of females have gotten to the college level and they have not been diagnosed because it didn't fit that standard of what they defined autism to be. And so if you are out there and you're feeling like you identify with autism and with autistic people, we see you, we hear you, we want to help you, and we validate that because a lot of the students come to me and they say, well, it feels like I'm kind of making an excuse for myself. It feels like, I shouldn't take this very seriously, but we talk to them for a little while and their concerns generally are valid. So there is the fad that's going on around there and we want to stay away from that. Autism isn't a fad. It's definitely something that impacts your life greatly.
And this is why the conversation is so important, because there is nuance. There's things that we're learning every day. And I've been working. Well, I shouldn't say working. I've been living in the bubble of autism spectrum for 10 years now, and there's still a ton I don't know, and I'm learning every day. And so that's why this conversation is important. And I fully support what you just said. And in no way, and this is the part of the conversation that's interesting, in no way, I don't think anybody who's talking about it is trying to be disrespectful. No. It's trying to find the next step kind of thing. And so, yeah, I mean, there's that nuance. Like you said, there's differences between men and women. There's differences in how people view themselves and things like that. And these are important conversations to have and important to go forward, and important to have this conversation to offer resources and offer opportunity for students and for anybody to find the support that they're looking for.
Right.
In that. So we are actually going to split the conversation into two episodes. In the second one, we're going to talk more about the supports that are on our campus, but just in general, how to go about daily lives and things like that when under the autism spectrum or interacting with someone who's on the autism spectrum. But before we do that, I do want to give an opportunity to talk about the resources just a little bit on this one. I don't want to leave it totally to the second one. I want to make sure that we at least touch on this. So if there is somebody listening and it's still Tuesday and it's not Thursday yet and they can't hear the next one, or for whatever reason they're wanting to get a deeper dive into resources or want to find out, have questions they want to find out answers to, what are some options, not only here on campus, but just in general? What are some resources that people can look towards in order to find those answers?
So, I mean, I would say first off, they can set up a consultation with us and we will answer any kind of questions that they
Us
may
being
have. The Autism Program.
There we go.
And so you can find us on our website, theautismprogram.illinois.edu, or you can, reach out to me personally. My email is amorris3, AMORRIS3 @illinois.edu, and you can schedule a free consultation and discuss whatever needs, concerns. We can get you set up with a list of referrals, whether that's, seeking out a diagnosis or screening, or if you're further along in your journey and you're looking for recommendations for speech therapy, occupational therapy, whether that's, mental health supports, or maybe some support with executive functioning for those who are a little older. There's all kinds of supports out there, and we can definitely, social skills, just social groups, all kinds of resources that we can get you connected with.
And we will have all these, we will have those emails and websites in our bio as usual. If you're looking for resources, you can just click on there in the bio of this episode and it'll take you right to it. But we're going to talk a lot more about I&I in the second half, the Illinois Neurodiversity Initiative. But if somebody wants to contact you right now, what are the ways to contact that program as well?
You can visit our website. We are ini.illinois.edu. And you can email us directly too.
Both of these programs, I know, if you're listening, you're like, well, I'm not sure if I should ask that question, or I'm not sure if this actually falls under their category. Doesn't matter. Contact them. They are, I've said about so many of our programs, that the people who work on this campus and who are involved on this campus do it because we care about the people on this campus. And we all have our expertise and we all have our area. And if you ask me a question that I don't know the answer to, that's fine. I'm going to find somebody who does. And so even if you contact either one of these programs and say, hey, here's my question, and it's not something that's in their purview, or it's something that there's somebody else on campus who has a better answer for that particular aspect of it, they'll put you in contact with it. So please reach out. And same with here at Healthy Illini, here at McKinley, contact us. We will connect you with who you need to be connected with, and we'll make sure that you get a chance to talk to somebody who's going to give you the answer that you're looking for. And so reach out. Be sure to reach out, and we will help with that. All right, we're going to pause here in the conversation. We're going to close up this first half where we're talking about the physiological side of things. And then please, if you're listening to this and it's out already, go ahead and listen to the second half, where we're going to talk more about the resources in depth and what I&I and what TAP do. And then some other things about, just kind of advocating for yourself and kind of approaching life as a part of the spectrum. And we're looking forward to have that second half of the conversation as well. But before we jump over there, I do want to thank Dr. Kramer, Dr. Patton, Adrian. Thank you so much for joining in this conversation. I appreciate you being on the program today.
No problem. Thank you
for having us.
Here.
It is Autism Awareness Month here in April, and so we're doing our part to try and help raise that at least a little bit and having this program. But if you're listening and you have questions, and it could be that you're not sure about what autism is, or you could be looking at your own life and you're listening to that checklist of the early indicators and say, you know what, there's a few of those that were me, and maybe I do have I do relate to this in some way. Please reach out. Contact us here at McKinley, contact the Autism Program, contact the Illinois Neurodiversity Initiative. We'll be happy to talk with you and see how we can help, how we can be a part of that. If you have comments, if you want to know more, contact us here at Healthy Illini. We'd love to follow up on these types of things, but we just want to be able to help you in whatever way we can, wherever you are in your journey. But thank you for joining us today. You are on a personal journey, no matter where you are in it. You are important and you matter. Your health and wellness are important and matter. And we're here to keep you well to excel. So go have a great week, Illini. Let us know how you're doing, and we'll catch you next time on Healthy Illini.